Hi, and welcome to our core webinar on research integrity. So my name is Elisabeth Staksrud. I'm a professor at the Department of Media and Communication at the University of Oslo, and I'm working together with my colleague Niv in the core project. And one of the things that we've been pondering is what is research integrity and how can researchers working in our field and with children and digital media and also beyond work on research integrity and understand it, and what are the challenges in our field and what strategies do we have to use, and so many questions. So in order to help us unpack this, today we have invited researchers from a wide variety of academic disciplines to tell us and help us to understand research integrity. I'm here with four amazing speakers from very different academic disciplines that will help us unpack this. Professor Ana Marušić from the University of Split, Croatia. Professor Halla Bjørk Holmarsdottir from the Oslo Metropolitan University here in Norway. Assistant Professor Malte Elson from Ruhr University Bochum in Germany, and Professor Göran Hermerén from Lund University in Sweden. So I would like to welcome you all, and then I would like to start and welcome all you who are listening in. So we are going to have 1.5 hours, and I just wanted to remind you of the program, and also that we will have an interactive session after the speakers, so where you can ask questions. But what is research integrity? And in order to prepare for this seminar, I thought we have to figure out what is it, and we talk about it all the time, but what is it really? And I did what we usually do, but never tell our students. I went to Wikipedia. So what does Wikipedia, which admittedly is not an academic source, but yet helpful, what do they have to say about research integrity? And unfortunately enough, it wasn't even a listing. I was redirected to a page called Scientific Integrity, and this was all there was. And while it might be slightly helpful to know that reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability are important features, it's not really helping me to understand how I can use and understand research integrity in my own research. So today we are going to try to figure this out more. We are going to start with a presentation on reporting consent and assent in research with children. Then we are going to hear from Professor Halla Bjørk Holmarsdottir about managing research integrity in international qualitative research project. We're going to hear about a case of a fraudulent paper. And finally, Professor Göran Hermerén is going to tell us about the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. After that, we are going to have an interactive panel discussions with the participants, with the speakers, and I would urge you all, if you have questions, if you have anything to tell us, if there's something you want to highlight, to use the Q&A function, and we will try to accommodate you as much as possible. So now I think I would like to welcome the first speaker, which is Professor Ana Marušić. You have to apologize for my bad pronunciation of your last name. She is the chair of the Department of Research in Biomedicine and Health at the University of Split School of Medicine in Croatia. She's also an honorary professor at the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine at the University of Edinburgh in the UK, and visiting professor at the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Ana Marušić chairs the research committee of the World Association of Medical Editors and is co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Global Health. She's in the steering group of the Equator, which is the Enhancing the Quality and Transparency of Health Research Network, and the co-chair of the Cochrane Scientific Committee. Professor Marušić was the president of the European Association of European Editors, the Council of Science Editors, and the World Association of Medical Editors. I'm just amazed. Thank you for having here, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. We are really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. I'm going to talk from a point of view of a journal editor in medicine, and without much ado, let me share my screen. I hope you see it. So, as I said, I'm going to talk from a point of view of medical research, but before that, I would like to kind of clarify some of the definitions and the difference between research ethics, research integrity, and something that is also discussed very much in Europe, especially under Horizon 2020 research framework, responsible research. So research ethics is actually what we do. It's looking at research practice viewed from the perspective of moral principles, what we can do in research. Whereas research integrity is about how we do research as scientists. This is the research practice viewed from the perspective of professional standards. And here we have issues that we're going to talk about, the research misconduct, what is called detrimental research practices or questionable research practices, how we do research design, how we assure quality, and so on and so on. And we also have this responsible research, which is the interaction between research and science. And this is the responsible research for the needs of the society, where we also look at the values, demands, and expectations from the community about research. So this is about definitions. I come as a journal editor, and journals are probably the places where all the misconduct gets detected, because most of the allegations are discovered when something is published. And why is that? Because this is, the best public documentation of a research, unless you go into the university or the research organization and look at the data. And this is the reason why the publishing is very important, and the role of editors in protecting the integrity of the published record is very important, and the editors are well placed not only to detect misconduct, but also to prevent misconduct. And I just wanted here to show the a spectrum of research and publication that can happen during design and conduct of research, analysis, reporting, and we have all kinds of problems, and we're going to talk about that later. I just wanted to kind of highlight the problems that we have. What we try to do in assuring the completeness and integrity and the usefulness of what is reported in medicine, we are probably the most regulated or self-regulated part of research, where we have all kinds of different rules and standards that we try to follow, because what we publish can actually affect the health, and it can kill somebody. So we try that what we report is full and transparent, and that's why we work a lot with reporting guidelines, which are some kind of checklist to ensure that you publish a minimum of information that is necessary to critically evaluate standards. So I would like to draw your attention here to the Equator Network that has a lot of this help for the researchers to ensure that what they report is fully reported, so that other people can critically assess it. And when we talk about consent in clinical trials, and this is the field that I work in, about 60%, what we know from research, they don't report the rates of consent, which is very important. This seems like, okay, it's not that important, but it's really important in understanding and analyzing the data and ensuring that the data are generalizable to the target population for which the study was done. And also another survey in the US also found out that there should be more standardization and age-appropriate practices to obtain consent for pediatric patients. Also, when we look at studies that are published about children, consent was reported for all studies, but not really, they didn't report how and who obtained this consent. And in trials with school children, assent is reported, but the rates, so how many people actually consent, are not reported. And even if we look at these reporting guidelines, they suggest that there is a statement that the consent was sought from the children, but there is no intention of reporting on this consent. And this is what we try to work on. And this is a very recent, so you see it was published on the 25th of January this year. This is a guidance from the European Medicine Agencies for the group on pediatric trial that have given a really extensive guidance on how different aspects of general and specific consent procedures should be adjusted to the ages of, and you have like two tables where it says for different age groups what can be included and what should not or is optional to include. So for example, depending on the age group, they provide guidance on language and translations and methods of presentation of information, or when there is a trial specific information, they also provide guidance on what should be included and in which way according to the age group of the participants. And also very useful for the people, especially that when they are working in an international collaboration, they also have a document which is quite old and hasn't been updated yet, where they say what are the legal ages of assent and consent in different European countries, which I think is also very relevant, and it's probably relevant for the research of children in media. And I just want to add, because we have only 10 minutes and I would rather leave a lot of time for discussion, I would just like to inform you about the current grant project that is going on under Horizon 2020, which is about how to actually put research integrity in practice, you know. And this is a paper that's a commentary that we published about going from talking to talk to walking the walk and putting this into practice. We as the whole European Union research framework starts from what Göran is going to talk about, the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, and we looked at prioritization, what research organization, this is the SOPS4RI, that's the name of the grant, and the partners on that grant, and we came with the priorities on 9 priorities, how to support researchers to do research integrity, I mean research with integrity, how research funding and research performing organizations can organize integrity structures, and how to communicate that to the professional and public community. And we are working on a toolbox that will give support to research performing organizations, how to assess what they have for research integrity and how you can improve and promote research integrity. And I will finish with another resource that is now available, which is a platform for research ethics and research integrity, which is a media wiki platform that was funded by the European Commission. It's called the Embassy of Good Science, where the discussions and resources, and there are lots of training resources about research integrity that are available here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so this was overwhelming and very interesting, and it just begs the question, I guess, before we move to the next speaker, if what do you think, is research integrity, is this something that is a matter for institutions and committees and checklists and pre-approval, or is it something that the individual researcher needs to
I think both. Yeah, I think both, because when the research integrity concept was developed, and it was at the end of 80s, beginning of 90s, where there were big cases of scientific misconduct, we usually thought about bad apples. So this is individual responsibility, and you know, the individual researchers are responsible. But now we see that it's also the responsibility of an organization to provide the culture and the climate for research integrity, and so that researchers can really follow research and not be guided by other pressures, like pressure to publish, pressure to obtain funding, and so on and so on. What are the realities of research? So it is both, I would say. It is for the researchers, but also for the organizations to provide support and the culture for good research.
Thank you. And I think, and I will perhaps save this question also for the audience later, just noting that the age of consent for autonomous consent for children across Europe and across the world is different from country to country. It ranges
definitely.
from 7 to 18, and maybe we can check out later with the audience also, in your experience, what is the right age for you?
I think the in Finland it's whenever a child can read and write, it's the age of assent, whereas in some you have like 12 years or 8 years or 9 years, so there is not a harmonization, and maybe Göran is going to talk about that. We don't even agree on the proper definition of research integrity across Europe. and especially about research misconduct, what research misconduct is. So it's a big problem, and that's why we should talk about this.
Yeah.
So thank you for organizing this webinar.
Yes, so thank you. And now we are going to maybe either get some solutions, or maybe more about the checklist system from our next speaker, which is Professor Halla Bjørk Holmarsdottir. She's going to talk about how to manage research integrity in an international qualitative research project. And she has a long career. We work in education and development. So we go now from medicine to education research. She's focusing particularly on Africa and on Asia, and more recently work focused on Europe. And she's the coordinator of a large-scale European research project funded by Horizon 2020. This is sort of one of our sister projects for the core project. It's called DIGIGEN. The impact of technological transformations on the digital generation. Her overall research focuses on comparative educational policies and practices, particularly with regard to marginalized and social justice. Drawing on interdisciplinary approaches, she has conducted research on the role of technology in the lives of children and young people, marginalization in education, social justice, language issues, gender, education, and youth. And she is the funding editor-in-chief of the Nordic Journal of Comparative and International Education, and the series editor for new research, The Voices by Brill Publishers. Welcome, Halla. We are really excited to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion with everybody. And hopefully what I have to say will complement our previous speaker. And I'm very glad to see some of the ideas about checklists and things. I like checklists. I think they help keep us organized and make things, well, not simpler, but in some ways a bit easier. So thank you again for inviting me. What I'd like to share today are some thoughts, and perhaps not maybe solutions, but at least a start to a discussion. And I think it's important to say that since research is becoming also increasingly an international endeavor, it's not surprising that there are also a lot of global initiatives for trying to harmonize principles or agreements. It's been argued that existing and well-established standards for ethical conduct of research are insufficiently broad, perhaps, and that they cover many issues. So it's kind of hard to sort of navigate the landscape in some way. As a leader for a large-scale EU project, this has, of course, been a challenge. And even the idea of, yes, at what age do our participants in the 9 different countries give consent? We had to start by mapping that out in the beginning. I'd like to just point out several international organizations that represent researchers, research funding organizations, publishers, and policymakers. These are all engaged with research integrity. And there are a number of international organizations that try to raise awareness, exchange information, and perhaps identify certain principles of good research, and of course, misconduct in research. Many have published a number of guidelines, and I think in many ways these are good, but in many ways it can be overwhelming. So these are just a list of some of the organizations that have some kinds of guidelines on either ethics or research integrity or any of these kinds of things. I think these are all well known to most of us. But also the European Commission has a long history of promoting aspects of ethics in research, but has only recently, I think, taken interest in research integrity per se. And the Horizon 2020 program is the first research framework program in which the rules of participation explicitly mention research integrity in the grant agreement. And it contains a specific article, and that's Article 34 under the grant agreement, in which the principal investigator, that would be me then, I would be excluded from applying for framework funding programs for up to 5 years, given that there would be a proven case of fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, or blatant attempts to duplicate findings, or serious undeclared conflicts of interest. And the penalty goes up to 10 years if there is a second case. And I think these are really important things. Of course, this is just one of the issues that we as coordinators or as PIs have to be aware of. But I think this is also important to discuss among the consortium. It's a responsibility not only of me as a coordinator of the project, but as the whole consortium. So if we look at the Article 34, it talks about research integrity being defined as ethical principles. And I think it's the important part is the professional standards and the things that are important for then responsible research, as our previous speaker talked about. I think these are important in 3 areas: the planning of the research, the conducting of the research, and then the dissemination. And some of the ethical principles from the Article 34 refer to things such as respecting human dignity and integrity, ensuring honesty and transparency, especially concerning research participants, and notably in getting free and informed consent and assent, and that has been really important for us in our research. We have working with children already from the age of 5 and up, so it was important for us to not only ask the parents if it was okay to participate, but to actually get the children to agree. And what we did was we designed different assent forms for the children. So depending on the age group that we're working with. And I was conducting a focus group interview some weeks ago, and then I had the assent forms for these young girls aged 9 and 10 to fill out and to sign. And they said, but our parents agreed. And I said, yes, but I'd like to know if you want to agree and if you want to participate. And I think that's really an important part of doing the research. The other issue is protecting vulnerable groups or vulnerable persons. And of course, we often always assume that children are vulnerable, and they are in many ways, and we have to protect them. But we also have to not, I think, disempower them. They have a sense of agency. The other issue is promoting justice and inclusiveness, and that has to do with sampling. How do you sample across a qualitative study? We often get the same types of people wanting to participate. It's a challenge to have a diversity of participants, to get a diversity of views, and we're hoping to be able to do that at least at the EU level. It's challenging within the country level. And certainly promoting justice and inclusiveness, but also minimizing harm and maximizing benefits, and also sharing the information with our participants. But what does ethics actually mean? An author called Peter Singer in 2001, a professor of bioethics at Princeton University, in 2001, he wrote that people often link ethics to be something that's just annoying, and it's stopping us from being able to do things that we want to do. In other words, of having fun. But he says that's not really the case. Ethics are an inquiry into what is right and wrong, and what is valuable to do, and what is important. And it attempts to answer the question what we ought to do, in a sense. There are also several organizations, as I already pointed out, that have developed general principles and allow a sort of code of conduct and inform us of specific rules and situations or conditions, the sort of do's and don't rules. However, the strictest rules also leave room for interpretation. And I think that's where the challenge comes, interpreting these rules. And they're not always clear-cut cases. As our last speaker pointed out, we don't even agree what research ethics definition is at the European level. Just to give you an idea, we, when we got the project funded, we received extra deliverables from the EU. No extra person months to do these, but we received 17 ethics deliverables, 9 involving protection of personal data, 4 involving non-EU countries. Obviously, we're Norwegians running the project, so that was a challenge, but we also had Brexit to deal with. And then 4 involving the human element. And I will touch upon only a couple of these. So these are our list of requirements. I just wanted to give you this sort of Gantt chart to show you how busy the first year in the project was. We had these 17 ethics deliverables, and there were already 3 due in the first 3 months of the project. Another 6 due in month 5, and the rest sort of a little bit further out. This presented, of course, a very hectic first year for us, or I should say for me, since we didn't get any extra person months. A lot of the ethics deliverables were done by myself, but also with input from all the project partners. I think for DigiGen ethics, it revolves around good research practice. So for us, it's research procedures, safeguards in terms of our young people, data protection and management, collaboration and working, review, valuing, and editing. And I think the important thing was for us to comply with the ethics requirements, but also to handle the research participants with respect and care in accordance with the provisions. So consent and assent, as I talked about. Research protocols had to be sensitive to the different groups, and also managing the potential harms and risk. And these are specifically our deliverables on details of incidental findings policy, which is not so much discussed in social science research. It comes from the medical community. And then our use of TSD, for example, to safeguard our data, and risk evaluation. And I just want to leave us with a closing question. In conducting research with children and young people who are often defined as a vulnerable group, how can we develop a policy on incidental findings that clarifies in which case an incidental finding should be reported without violating the confidentiality between the researcher and the participants themselves? So I think that's where I'll leave us.
Thank you. Wow, food for thought. Yes, so of course we all now are dizzy from your Gantt chart. So so I want to just ask, so given this, and I hear this from a lot of colleagues, and I've experienced this myself also, that you get into these projects and we are, you know, we try to get funding, and also students when they start their own project, and suddenly you find yourself in this world where you should report. And it should be extensive, and it has to be according to a special system, and it also has to be done rather quickly and with no resources. So what I often wonder, and maybe I can ask you, so in these situations where all this has to go in for a year, do we actually have the time to reflect upon the research integrity, or do we end up just reporting standard ways of doing it? Or do we actually take the time, which I guess is the intention, I must assume, to reflect and find the good practice for this project? Can we get an honest answer?
I will say yes and no, because with some of the deliverables, especially the one on incidental findings, we had to develop a policy for us as a research group, and we had to decide and agree upon. I couldn't just define a policy and then say, you guys all have to follow it. So that was really a bigger discussion. I think the other one on risk and security, so I basically had to assess if we needed a DPEIA. Yeah, I had to assess if we needed one. Basically, I just had to do it myself because there were no guidelines.
What is that?
A data protection impact assessment, which is basically what our NSD does in Norway, our National Data Ethics Board, in a sense. But the EU required that I actually had to assess if we needed one. Of course we needed one. We are dealing with children and young people, but so it basically meant I had to sort of do it myself in a sense. And I think that when I had less time to really go in and discuss, I did discuss with NSD and other people, but still, I don't think I really had a sufficient amount of time to deal with some of the issues to the degree I would have liked to.
Okay, thank you. That's it's refreshing, as I think it's good if we're going to make this ethic and research integrity system work. We need to be honest with each other about.
Yeah. If I can just jump in and have a comment, I think this also talks about what we discussed before. Is it research or the research organization? And this is where the research organization should have provided the support for you as a project to address these questions. And on the other hand, I think it's wise, and I say that as an ethics expert that does this to people, ask them for all of these ethics requirements, is also to have a ethics advisor or ethics advisory board to help such complex projects, because then you can have a funding for it, so you can also have person months for that, and it does really help you when you're thinking about these things in advance while preparing the project proposal, because this is now a standard and is expected from researchers to follow the ethics principles and have these deliverables.
Yeah, we have an ethics subcommittee, which is useful, but thank you, Anna, for pointing that out. The institutions do need to, I think they do a good job, but I don't think they do a good enough job. And I think there is more support needed for
and
researchers.
If I can just say, in Horizon Europe.
I'm sorry, Anna. I think I would like to do so we can end up now. Maybe we can save the rest of the discussion for the panel, because the cue from Halla was now sort of the institutions need to step up and take responsibility, and that reminds me that we'll have a new presentation saying about like institutional responsibility and what to do very soon. But before that, I would like to just invite all of you who is now listening in, again, if you have any questions, let us know, use the Q&A function. I'm here with my colleague, Niv Nivrin. Niv, do you want to show your show yourself, and she will be you will be keeping an eye right on the different questions, and we also have a little poll for you before we go to the next. So
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've just launched a poll, so you should be able to go into it. And the idea here is this is not an exam, it's not a test, but it's more just to give us a little bit of a break in the proceedings and to try to interact with you a little bit. So the first question we have is, do you know what to do if you suspect a breach of research integrity? And the second question is, what is the age of autonomous consent to participate in research in your country? One of the options is, I don't know as well. So just if you want to just try to fill in those questions, we can see what's happening. And as we can see, we have 46 people in the audience, and the majority who have answered right now don't know what to do if they suspect a breach of research integrity, which is really interesting, and I think really important for us in the core project to know and reflect on, in terms of we need to provide resources, we need to provide people with information about what to do. And I think Malte might also have some interesting pointers for us in a couple of minutes. So it's just very, very interesting to see the emphasis on the topic of research integrity, and the emphasis on this at the project administration level, and in some cases at the institutional level. But what we as researchers who are participating in this webinar now actually, how equipped we are to deal.
So we're going to show you all the results in a couple of minutes. We'll give the last ones of you a chance to answer now, and then we'll show you the results. Okay, so final seconds. You want to end the polling and see what are the results now, so we can all see?
Okay. So there you go, the result of the first question there. I hope you can see this now. Yeah.
So 75% of the people here, who are actually people interested in research integrity, don't know what to do if we suspect a breach. And I don't know either. I must admit, a couple of times I've tried to report, but it tends to just end up in nothing, because nobody knows who's going to actually deal with it. And when it comes to the age of autonomous consent, 22% don't know. It's about 16, 14, 12. And I think maybe next question would be, what should it be? Should we agree on what it should be? So maybe we'll do that before the panel. Yes, okay, so now we are ready to go over to the next speaker. So this speaker is going to talk about especially this institutional and responsibility, scientific misconduct and Brandolini's law, the odyssey of retracting a fraudulent paper. And this is very exciting for us working with children in media, because it has to do with the field that we care about a lot, computer games. So we're super excited. So I would like to invite Malte Elson. He's a behavioral psychologist from Cologne, Germany, currently based in Bochum, where he's an assistant professor and head of psychology of human technology interaction lab. His research focuses on three major themes: IT security, including learning and problem solving, processes in IT security; B, learning with media, including how individuals acquire behaviors and behavioral responses from and with the media, both voluntary and involuntary; meta science, principles and mechanisms of the production of scientific knowledge, including the outcomes of academic peer review, statistical reporting practices, and behavioral measurement and operationalizations. He's also one of the founding members of the Ombuds Committee of the German Psychological Association. So welcome, Malte. We look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation and the introduction. Because my time is very limited and I have to report on a very long case, I'll skip all of the formalities and head right into it. Just one note before I start with the case: if you might not know Brandolini's law under this name, under a different name, which is the bullshit asymmetry principle. Just means that the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude larger than to produce it. And I think correcting the scientific record when misconduct had happened is a very good example of this principle. So today I'll give you a 5-minute version of a 4-year process it took to get this paper retracted, and you can watch time fly by in the upper right corner, in which I will show the events, the dates of events in this process. So this is the paper, and it was published in Communication Research on April 30, 2012. And in September 11, 2013, Patrick Markey, so who's not me, but who will become important later on, sends Brad Bushman, the senior author, an email about the appropriateness of some statistic analysis. And this question was actually completely unrelated to our later findings, and there was no initial suspicion of misconduct of any sort. It was just more of a technical question, I guess. And so he asked the author, and it takes a long time until Markey receives a data set. So we are now in April 2014. And then he does some basic calculations, and some of the numbers do not match those reported in the paper, like age distributions and number of cases in experimental conditions. So he informs the authors of his findings. The authors a week later sent another data set, and now the numbers match those in the paper, and the existence of this previous data set is not really sufficiently explained. So Markey does some further digging, and he writes up his findings and sends them to the communication researchers, editors-in-chief, Michael Roloff and Pamela Shoemaker, and guess what happens next? Nothing happens. They don't really respond. They ignore him, in fact, and 4 months later, the paper is published in a print issue of the journal. And so this is where Markey gets a bit frustrated, and he decides, for whatever reason, to call me and describes the events to me that have happened so far, and asks basically for a sanity check. Whether I agree that what he observed in those data raises suspicion for me as well. And it does. So we decide to write a full report together and send it to the Ohio State University and the BU Amsterdam, which are the affiliations of the two authors of this paper. And so now we are in January 2015, and we send a 36-page report to those institutions. Amsterdam confirms the receipt 4 months later and declares the complaint inadmissible on July 8. And Ohio State says they will form a committee on April 8 and initiates what's called a preliminary investigation in their own guidelines. And so 8 months later, September 4, they send us a preliminary report, which is based on several events. They interviewed Mark and me. They interviewed Bushman, who in the interview claims he had nothing to do with the data collection and just helped writing the paper, basically. The first author has stopped communicating with anyone. So she's no longer in Ohio State, and she has just ceased to respond to any emails or letters. And the committee basically blames her. And they say that the senior author had nothing to do with it. It's a vote of 1 to 3. So one party also blamed him, but the other 3 cleared him, basically. Interestingly, they send us this report, and with the report, they also send us a flash drive, which includes files and emails that they took from his computer, which at the time, I was a bit stunned by this, not only because I felt they actually went to his lab and took some files, but I was just surprised that they would share them with us, because it was also personal communication and so on. But anyway, they did. Bizarrely, the committee itself did not really look at those files. This became clear from their own writing. They basically dumped them into our own lab. And so we used those files to reconstruct the probable fraud. We think we know what happened. Some of the data were duplicated, and there were clear indications of some of the cases, numbers in cases were changed, which is falsification of data, of course. And so, but the communication, which was also part of those files, clearly shows that they were both involved in the data analysis. There were like appointments made when they would meet to run analysis and so on. And so we write a comment on the report and send it to the committee. And then in October, they send a final report. Committee still blames Whittaker and still clears Bushman. The vote is now 2 to 2, but it has to be anonymous. And they recommend they retract the paper. The case is then referred to the grad school because the misconduct happened when she was a grad student. The grad school does another interview with us in March 2016, and the investigation is declared confidential in August 2016, so almost a year after this. That's when we decide to inform the new editors of communication research, because quite some time has passed, and so there's a new team of editors. And we decide to inform them about our findings, because the authors still have not retracted the paper, although their own university had asked them to do so more than a year ago. And after some back and forth with us and with the senior author, they retract the paper in January 2017. And then things escalate a little bit. Ohio State, I got a really nice letter right after Christmas. Ohio State files a formal complaint with our university, so with Patrick's and mine, saying that we told other people about confidential matters that were still under investigation, and that we violated their privacy and violated some procedures. Which of course do not apply to us because I don't work at Ohio State. And then Villanova, Patrick's University, declares this complaint resolved in January. So a month later, my university takes a whole year to say that, yeah, there's nothing there, which was a stressful time for me. And then in August 2017, they revoked the first author's PhD. Again, nothing has really happened to the senior author. And that's where I'll stop for now on this case. If you want to know more about this, I put online a detailed timeline of these events that you can check out if you like. And I also prepared some general remarks on reporting scientific misconduct based on this case. It's an absolute nightmare. There's very little accountability for the institutions involved. For you, there's little to gain and much to lose, actually. knowing a paper is still out there while you know it is fraudulent will cause you a lot of grief. And if you don't do something, you'll be on your own. So if you're ever involved in such a case, team up with multiple people to be on your side, so you have someone to talk to about this. Even in the light of all of this, you should still do it anyway, I think. So sorry for the downer.
Wow, thank you. That is both interesting and depressing. So at some point we want, if I can, so just speaking, we want people to have, behave in a good way and have professional integrity, but doing something about it seems hard. And of course, if we can allow ourselves to just use this case as this was an example, but if we can talk about it principally, and I know this also from discussions from the Norwegian Research Ethical Committee, which I chair on social sciences and humanities, is for instance, where do you draw the line between what is bad research or bad methods, or not knowing the statistical methods well, and what is actually fraudulent behavior, and who gets to decide where that line is drawn, and what is, for instance, the responsibility of co-authors when they might not have the expertise on the different types of methods that are used in sections of the papers. It creates all these extremely, I don't know, Malte, if you have any answers to this, or?
I mean, I think there are cases that are complicated because not everybody who's an author on a paper necessarily has the level of knowledge required to detect fraud by one of their co-authors. At the same time, I think there's some minimal standards that everybody could follow. For example, every author should be in possession of the entirety of the research. So all of the data, for example, should, if it's possible, ethically or legally, to have a copy of all of the files, just so that there's a paper trail that people can follow when there are these allegations. I think in this case, this was much clearer. I think there was clear evidence that fraud happened. There was no benign explanations of the discrepancies in the data sets, right? Why would a data set exist where a case had different numbers in a survey instrument that they filled in, right? So there's really no good explanation for it, particularly when the data set with the different numbers happens to confirm the hypothesis, whereas the other data set doesn't. So I think there was a very simple case in that regard. And yet, the university didn't do much. I mean, at first we felt that they really took action, but then, of course, it all rang hollow when they just, they told the office to retract the paper, although they could have gone themselves to the journal and asked them to do it. And I think institutions have very little motivation to do something beyond the absolute minimum.
Thank you. Yes. So I think here's a case of both the responsibility of authors, co-authors, journals, and institutions. And of course, and I would just sort of remind the audience and maybe kickstart the discussion for later before our last speaker, is to say also that, of course, what we do, especially, or not especially, but also in the field of children and media and research on computer games and on screen time and whatever, has political implications. It has implications for people's lives and how we manage and control freedom of expression and how people get access to content. And so research is important, and people should be able to trust us. On that note, I am going to introduce the next speaker, and thank you, Malte. So our last speaker before we do a panel and discussion Q&A is Professor Göran Hermerén. He is going to talk about the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, problems and practices. So maybe that will help us. And Professor Hermerén was for many years chair of the permanent working group on science and ethics of ALEA, which is called All European Academies. He was president of the European Group of Ethics in Science and New Technologies in Brussels in 2001 to 2011. And he's currently involved in several EU-funded research projects. He has numerous publications, mainly on ethical problems in medicine, besides authoring and editing books on research ethics, aesthetics, and philosophy of art. So this seems like a perfect guy to finalize our panel today. Welcome, Göran. We are excited and looking forward to hear you. And just turn on your microphone and we are ready for you.
Thank you, Elisabeth. It's been very interesting so far, and it's always difficult to be the last speaker because so many good points have been made already. But I've been asked to say something about the Code of Conduct and something about what happened after the European publication of the European Code of Conduct. And I have a main message first, which is very simple, and it is: research integrity is important for trust in research, and trustworthy research is important for funders, for research subjects, for users, and for editors. And I have three key points concerning this main message, and I'll try to, as you said, Elisabeth, convey them without PowerPoints. And the first point is simply that there has been a debate on spectacular cases of fraud and misconduct in research in many countries. And as you know, there's also been a debate on alternative facts, fake news, and distrust of experts. And media, of course, play an important role in all these debates. And in addition to spectacular cases of fraud and misconduct focusing on FFP, falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism, there are many gray zones of questionable research practices which are important. And as Elisabeth just said, these questionable research practices are difficult to agree on, because are we seeing examples of haste, negligence, incompetence, or attempts to deceive? This is not always easy to agree on. The second key point is that there are rules and regulations building trust if followed. They are imposed on research by the society and by the research community itself, the professional standards. For instance, concerning animal experiments, clinical trials, authorship credits, different ways of obtaining informed consent, and dealing with incidental findings, as well as concerning obligations to funders and collaborators. Now, if political, economic, religious, or other interests are allowed to undermine these rules, trust may be threatened. And the third key point is that the European Commission has been concerned about recent debates and some changes in the research landscape, including the use of open data and open science. And there were many reasons for this concern, and they included the insights supported by the debates I just referred to, that traditional reliance on self-regulation is no longer appropriate to prevent, detect misconduct, and reproducibility and replicability of scientific data has been under increasing scrutiny, and that the increasing number of retractions is alarming. In fact, there is a study of retractions in the life sciences showing that misconduct accounts for the majority of retracted scientific publications. And in this study, focus was not on a dozen of papers, but on more than 2,000 papers published. The study was published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2012. So for these reasons, the Commission concerned ALEA, and the process to revise the previous Code of Conduct involved an extensive stakeholder consultation across Europe. So the next thing I will want to comment on is the contents of the Code of Conduct. I want to highlight some important aspects of the Code of Conduct, which Anna has already showed. And it's a 16-page, easy-to-read document. It describes good research practice in a number of contexts, including research procedures, data practice and management, collaborative working, publication and dissemination, as well as reviewing, evaluating, and editing. And an important section in the Code of Conduct deals with violations of research integrity. This is to say, research misconduct and other unacceptable practices. My main message is here that the Code of Conduct presents a general framework for research integrity. It does not regulate precise details. The framework can serve as a basis for national and discipline-specific policies. And I want to make 3 brief comments to this message. First, the general goal is to create a supportive climate for research integrity and research ethics. Therefore, the Code of Conduct emphasizes the responsibility of research institutions, the need for monitoring, for recurrent education, and for updates. Second, for the first time, both public and private research organizations agreed on the principles of the Code of Conduct. And third, the Code of Conduct is a living document. It will be revisited and revised if needed between every 3 or 4 years. And as to the implementation that Halla already mentioned in her talk, the new Code of Conduct is referred to in Article 34 of the Model Grant Agreement of Horizon 2020. It's also used by many universities and funding agencies. What happened since? The European Commission is and was an important player, and a later initiative by the Commission was the MLE, the Mutual Learning Experience on Research Integrity, which I chaired and which Ana Marušić participated as one of the high-level experts. 12 countries, including Norway, were involved, and the general idea was to exchange information about practices and learn from each other. 4 themes were selected at the first meeting to be discussed: processes and structures, incentives, communication and dialogue, training and education. So practices were discussed and compared. There were considerable and interesting variations between disciplines and countries, very important to keep in mind. Finally, the general and specific recommendations were proposed by the participants. And the final report of the MLE was published in 2019 and can be downloaded free of charge. You just Google MLE on research integrity and you get the link and you can download it and read it. Finally, coming back to the Code of Conduct. It's a living document, as I said, and for the simple reason that the scientific landscape and the regulatory landscapes are not static. So now a process of update has started. Literature searches have been carried out and comments from stakeholders will be collected. A small group has begun to work and we expect to finish in 2022. And personally, I anticipate only minimal changes. So in conclusion, the gray zones and research cultures remain to know more about. What works in one country or for one kind of research may not work so well in others. Yet, in view of the exchange, the increasing collaboration of researchers within and between different countries, important issues needing to further be discussed include conditions of research on vulnerable groups, how to deal with whistleblowers, as Malte mentioned in his interesting talk, and co-authorship. So here the 2 basic questions are: who is entitled to be an author and what obligations does authorship entail? And in an academic career, this is a very hot issue for young researchers. Charity begins at home is an English saying, as you may know. Misuse of authorship has been demonstrated in studies of medical dissertations also in my own country. There are many other problems that need to be discussed and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Göran. So Okay, so we'll soon go to the panel discussion. But one thing, because there's so much, and you've been part of this work, and there's so much work going on, and making these rules and trying to get people to talk to each other across countries, which is important for many of us who do international research or work in international projects. But do you have a sense? And I hope this is not. I don't mean this rude. I'm just like, what do people use these guidelines? Are they integrated? Because in all honesty, as a professor at the University of Oslo, as an employer there, I cannot remember a single time where somebody has come and told me about these processes or these regulations or rules. So I'm not sure, does it drizzle down to the actual researchers? Do we use them, or does it become this sort of thing we do on the layer of organizations and institutions talking to each other, but perhaps not so much in practice? Do you have a sense of this?
Yes, as you remember, I stressed that the Code of Conduct emphasizes the responsibility of research institutions, the need for monitoring, the need for recurrent education and updates. And I've given many talks in my university about the Code of Conduct, and many others have done that as well. It's pretty well known in Sweden, but for the simple reason that the Research Council uses it, and it's a requirement to comply with it, as it is with in the Commission. So, and money talks, as you know.
Yes, so also in research integrity, money talks.
And as Halla mentioned, it's referred to in the Article 34 of the Model Grant Agreement. So those who get funding from the Commission have to follow the principles of the Code of Conduct. Otherwise, they will get a long list from the Commission of things that need to be rectified, their proposal, or commented on or clarified.
So for me, that is also slightly sad that it becomes sort of a crowbar or a tool, something that we need to do if we want to get funding, but it might not be always well integrated in the research community and collegiality as a whole. I remember, and we're going to now slide into the panel discussion, going to remind you all to send your questions. We have a few already that we will address, but it reminds me, and I don't remember who did this study, but it reminds me of hearing ones about misconduct in academia. And somebody had done a study trying to say, why do people cheat? Why do people do fraudulent paper? And they had this long list of reasons. And some of them, a few of them, you could actually address, which is like what we already talked about, like bad methods, or not knowing, or haste, or things like that. But then they said a good portion of them had to do with things we cannot do anything about, which I found depressing, which has to do with megalomania, narcissism, more diagnosis. And I guess that also in research, we have a problem with people feeling that I know this area so well, so I don't need to collect the actual data. I can just write up the conclusion. So we need to work in
Elisabeth, the cases you mentioned of megalomania and narcissism, these are the spectacular cases with psychopaths, Macchiarini, Stapel, Sudbø, and a few others.
Yeah.
And what I want to emphasize, and what could be done something about, are the more questionable research practices, the gray zones, where you don't have psychopaths, people with megalomania and suffering from narcissism. But the research culture needs to be aware of the gray zones, and we need to discuss and be transparent about where the lines are to be drawn.
Yeah. So that brings us actually to the first question, and I will now open the floor to all panelists. So